Hey, my name is Dakota Hunt, and you are tuning into the Atlantis channel. I am so excited to be here today with one of my good friends, Byrne. She's in the Pause Breathwork Facilitator training with me, and I've connected with her a little bit, and I'm so excited to just get to know her better today, to bring her into this space. Byrne has such a cool story that I've heard a tiny piece of, and I'm really, really excited to just dive in more. And I just want to name before we get started, knowing where this is about to head. Thank you, Byrne, for your vulnerability and showing up today and coming to this space and sharing your story. I know it's not easy. And so I know that I'm going to appreciate it. I'm going to take it to heart. And I know so many other people are going to benefit as well. So thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me on, Dakota. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be so good. And if you're okay, let's just dive in. I would love to hear, where were you when you decided that you wanted to do breath work? Like maybe physical location and metaphorically. Like what was your life like? How did breath work come into your awareness? Yeah, I'll let you take it away.
I might actually take that question and go back even further because I didn't
Totally.
to kind of explain how I arrived at breathwork. It might be good to just hear where I was. I guess this is almost 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
But yeah, 5 years ago, I was living a very different life than the one that I'm living today. I was very consumed by my work. I worked in federal politics and communication. So I had a very fast-paced job, very intense, lots of international travel, not a lot of time off, just moving at crazy light speed all the time. And I got to a point where I was so run down, so exhausted that I would be at work and I would be, maybe moderating a media availability, and I wouldn't be able to hear what was happening around me because I was so anxious and so run down that it was like bubble wrap was over my ears. I was having panic attacks. I was barely hanging on. I remember I would get an email and think I need to respond to that. And then I'd open my phone to respond to the email and I'd see that I'd responded to it already 5 minutes ago. And I couldn't even remember what I had done 5 minutes before that. And I think that's when the nature of those jobs, you can't afford to make a mistake because it's public, because you're communicating on behalf of the government. And so I was just so afraid, I'm one step away from making a big mistake, from saying the wrong thing to a journalist, from just embarrassing the government. I'm not myself. I'm not okay. And I was just so exhausted that I couldn't even line up another job. I just quit with no plan. And it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I'm just going to live off my savings. I'm going to trust that the universe will take care of me. I'm literally just so exhausted. I can't do anything. And the first few weeks after I did that, I just crashed. I slept like crazy. I was super depressed. I was, just kind of binge watching Netflix. I still had Google alerts on for all of the politicians I worked for. I was still half in, half out. It was really hard to detach from all that. But slowly and surely, I started this healing journey. And I do want to just name, I think that part where I was just not getting out of bed and just having a good old wallow. I don't know if you're into astrology, but I'm a Cancer. Cancers love to have a wallow. I will always want to normalize. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I want to normalize the wallow. The wallow is such an important piece of the healing journey of I really wasn't even able to heal. I just needed to just be a blob for weeks on end. Yeah. And so then I started really doubling down on going to therapy. I joined a meditation group that was around the corner from my apartment. And the woman who ran that group would turn out to be my mentor and taught me my Reiki levels. And through that process, I started to kind of unpack my story a little bit. And I realized that this pattern of working so hard and burning out, I had done even in childhood. I was so intense about even schoolwork. In grade 3, I remember I got mono. What grade 3 gets mono? You're so little. And I was out for weeks, just dead. And I just kind of was looking back at my life and I'm like, this is a pattern. Like I throw myself into something and then I burn out and then I get sick and then I throw myself into something else. And it turns out that's actually a trauma response, which I didn't
Yeah.
really appreciate. And I don't mind sharing with your channel. I'm a survivor of incest and sexual violence. And I think I didn't even have awareness that that could be affecting my whole life. I didn't even know I was a survivor of incest. That was like blocked out, and I don't know like what direction we want to go with this. If I can talk about how I recovered those memories, but it was just start like when I finally like had nothing else in the window. I didn't have work as a distraction, and my full-time job was just healing. I started to look at some of this, and I could see like the ripples that this had on my life. And it was a really difficult thing to reckon with.
Yeah.
It was very validating to speak with a professional who was actually validating that my experiences were real. And I have so many experiences of sexual assault, from like being a teenager, to like what happened in my childhood that was so repressed, to I lived in Vietnam. I taught English abroad for a year. I was date raped when I was there, like drugged in a nightclub. So some of them were more obvious than others.
Yeah.
But like I had this whole history of just all of these assaults. And I guess I thought like that can't be possible. One person can't go through all these things. Like I must be making some of them up. And I also had a really unhealthy relationship to alcohol that actually started when I was a teenager. I really liked what happened when I would drink because I would get out of my head. I was always so nervous and always wanting to do everything perfect, never wanting to make a mistake. And when I would drink, like you don't care when you're drunk. And I love that. So I used to drink a lot, and then I would sleep with strangers, and like often those were not actually consensual encounters, but because I had been drinking, I didn't really understand that. So there was just all this stuff to look at, and also sharing it with my family, which was really difficult. I only confided to one person in my family at first about what had happened to me as a child, and like they weren't able to hear it. And so I felt very alone, very isolated. I definitely fell into a depression. And I think this is an important part to name about healing is that when you do start a healing journey, it almost feels like it's getting worse before it gets better. And I was so lonely. I was in such a dark place. I was starting to recover all these memories and like really appreciate everything that I had been through. And I almost like wished like it was better before when I didn't think about any of this. It was really heavy. And I look at where I am now, and I want to like, I wish I could go back in time to that version of me that like was questioning like whether life is even worth living, and tell her that like it's going to be okay and it's going to get better. But that's part of the healing sometimes is to like, is it's going to be really painful because all of a sudden all this stuff that you've numbed out and put in little boxes and little corners are like starting to open up. And so I really during that time wanted to find things that would make me feel better. And I tried all kinds of things. Reiki was such a big one that really helped me. Meditation was a big one. There were some things that were less good than others. I went to like this sketchy palm reader. That was an awful experience. She made me cry. So I don't know that I would recommend her necessarily, but just, just seeking it and trying things. And I eventually stumbled on breathwork through an event that I attended. And we just did like a few minutes of it, but I felt this like settling in my body. And I was just like, what is this? And so then I downloaded an app, and I was using the app to just do like self-guided breathwork sessions in my bedroom at home. And well, you know this with breathwork. Breathwork like brings you into this altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I meditate, I really struggle to focus. I have a very busy, active mind, as I know a lot of us do.
Yeah.
And in breath work, like having to stay with the breath pattern, that gave my brain something to do. And so I was able to get really deep in these meditations, and I was actually able to start re-experiencing some of my trauma in a way that felt safe, compared to like
Ah,
having a nightmare and waking up terrified and thinking that my partner in my bed is my abuser, and just like, you know, like
ah,
really struggling to accept that, like, and it's 2023, you're in your bedroom. Like that experience is terrifying. But for some reason in breath work, I was able to re-experience and feel some of these things that had been stored in a way that felt manageable. And
mm,
it's like I could feel some of my trauma like starting to leave my body. And I also want to be clear that in no way am I fully healed? And I think healing is a lifelong journey, but my symptoms are so much more manageable now. And I really, I really believe that breathwork can be such a supportive tool for survivors, because when you're so numb and detached from your body, and your body doesn't feel like a place that is safe to be, doesn't feel like it's yours, when you start to learn that you can actually, like, just by using your own breath, support
yeah,
yourself in healing and transforming, it's so empowering. And like in breathwork, your body, your intuition tunes in and chooses the pace of the breath pattern. Like
yeah,
the facilitator, the guide might cue it, but like you're going to start to find your rhythm, and your body might start to move, or it might do what it needs to do, but that's your natural intuition that's taking over. And when I realized, like, my body's so smart, my body knows how to do this, like, it started to really help me heal my relationship to my body. And I feel like breath work and other things, sensual movement was a good piece too, if you ever want to talk to me about my pole dance journey. But breath work was like the main piece that really gave me my body back. And so that's then, fast
wow.
forward to now, I'm like, I want to learn this. Like, I want to offer this to others who might have similar experiences and might be looking to connect with their bodies. And so
Yeah.
that's what brought me to the program that we're both in right now and both loving.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Once again, like, thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your openness. And I see you. I see you in that. Yeah. Um, I have so many like questions and paths to go down with this. And I think one thing that's feeling really prominent for me right now is I'm curious what kept you on that healing path. There was that like post that job when it just was like it came crashing down, right? You just quit your job, you had your wallowing period, which I totally respect. And yeah, right? Like that's so important. What was it, what were you seeking? Like what kept you on that path? What kept you just trying and trying and trying?
I think there was a part of me that believed that it has to get better. Um, I I really took a lot of solace in the stories of other survivors. Um, this is a random one, but Jonathan Van Ness, from Queer Eye, his memoir, although his trauma is very different from what I experienced, like just reading his memoir and like seeing who he is now, and he's living this big, bold
Mm,
life. And I'm like reading his story, and it's heartbreaking. And you see,
yeah,
like, so I think that was a piece of it, was just looking to others that like were setting that example. And the main thing, and this is the synchronicity between my therapist that I found and my meditation teacher was so divine, I believe. But they were both very focused on encouraging me to connect with my inner child. I call her
yeah,
little Byrne. And I think, like, I learned how to talk to little Byrne, and I'd have conversations with my inner child even during like these dark days when I was so depressed, and I just wanted to make life better for her. And I feel like it was like a journey where we were both figuring out, like, it's called reparenting. And I
yeah,
was like learning to take care of this little baby that the first time I like visualized meeting her, she was like hiding in a corner and had no interest whatsoever in it, like just terrified of me because I had been so disconnected from her. And so even on my really dark days, I would just like put my hand over my heart and just tell her, like, I'm here and I see you and I feel you, and like I'm not going to give up on you. And so even though I had no idea when it would get better or how that was going to look, I just had this like this love for this little baby in me that had been abused and had been neglected and hadn't been given the chance to express. And like, I tell her all the time, I believe you. And I'll be honest, there are actually some moments when I question my own story still. And that's also a trauma response.
Yeah.
But in those moments where I'm actually wondering, like, what if I made all this up? Like, I'm now out there, I'm about to start my business and I want to help other survivors. And what happens if I imagined all of this? And in those moments, I actually hear her speak to me. And she says that, it's real. And like, thank you for seeing me. And so that relationship, that inner child piece has been really supportive for me on my journey. And I like to, in my sessions with clients, if they're open to it, I'll always like add in an element of inner child work if they would like that, because it has been just so supportive for me.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Thank you. I have to say I'm new-ish. Like I've been aware of the inner child journey for a while, but I'm new to actually going down that path. And I think it's like similar to you, the few interactions that I've had, like she's in the distance, quiet a ways away in the corner, And so I'm excited for you in your business to like bring that to people and to explore that because I feel the magnitude of it, even though I'm still very, very young in my journey of inner child work. That's where the magic is, right? Like just yesterday, I went back to my 3-year-old self and felt some of the things that she was feeling at that time. And just like you were naming earlier, it is so amazing to me how I've always known logically that not always, in my personal growth journey, I've known logically that the way through an emotion is by feeling it, right? But every time I would feel an emotion, it just felt so intense. Like it just felt like it was going to overwhelm and overtake me versus when I'm in breath, I can feel that emotion with an element of safety. And you were naming that, how you were sometimes you would have a nightmare or a dream and it would almost re-traumatize you. Would that be a good word for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would re-traumatize you, but then in a breath session, you could feel that and process it with an element of safety. Could you speak to that a little bit more about what that is like and why you think that breath work is able to do that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. One big difference, I think, like when you're having a flashback is like they can kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Whereas when you are engaging in breath work, you are consciously choosing to be in a
Yeah.
breath work journey. And so knowing at any point in a breathwork session that I can stop if it's too much, I can stop the pattern is a really big piece. I feel like I have the control, whereas when I'm experiencing just a flashback, like a nightmare, they just show up and then I'm processing it. And I think there's such a spiritual component to breath work. Like it brings you in deeper connection with your soul or your higher self or your essence or like whatever you want to call that source. There are so many words for it. And I think that spiritual connection that you reach when you're doing this breath work and you're connecting into the body, and it just creates this like field of safety where you can almost experience two things. That's how I word it. Actually, I feel two things at once. I can feel the painful emotion, or the often it shows up like terror is a good word that I feel, or grief. The amount of time I have spent in a breathwork session just crying and like letting out sounds that I'm glad like are not recorded and no one has to hear, but just like of like not being seen and nobody knowing and no one helping me and no one showing up, like that abandonment wound, like these things would come out. But at the same time, it's like I feel this like warmth and it's like I'm held, and I don't know if that's like spirits or guides or however you want to call it, but something about breath work just connects me with this part of myself that is so deep and so loving and so safe. So while I'm feeling completely unsafe, there's this undertone that's holding me, and I love that. Like I keep breathing through it, and even though it's scary for a moment, there's just this knowing that like, it's not permanent. This isn't going to last. And then always in the sessions, if I keep breathing through it, I just sort of transcend that terror and reach this other place of peace or of a release. And that is so powerful, because when you're experiencing like a flashback from a nightmare, you're in, like, the part of your brain that is giving you that, like, thinks that you're still in that moment, like when it happens. So in my case, like, a lot of my nightmares are about when I was a child and with my abuser, and like I was about 3 years old. So my brain thinks I'm 3 years old. I'm 35. But like in a flashback, like I have no access to the part of my brain that knows I'm 35. I'm just very much stuck in that moment. But somehow in breath work, it's like I know that I am, like, I'm here to support that 3-year-old, but I'm not 3 years old.
Wow. There's just so much power here. There's so much power in your story, and I can just feel that ability to be your 35-year-old self holding your 3-year-old versus just becoming and morphing into that 3-year-old version of yourself. Just what a beautiful experience. Can I ask, what was it that sparked you down this path of remembrance? Because you talked about how you didn't, like in the beginning, you know, as you quit your job, like you didn't even realize you were in trauma response. You didn't really think about your trauma. What sparked you to go down that path, to dig into it a little bit in order to, you know, to whatever end at that time? Yeah, what was that like for you?
I think, like, so when I started my journey with therapy, I really I talked about what happened with me in Vietnam, because that was a more evident example of like,
Yeah.
I'd only had like one drink and all of a sudden I'm waking up like in a windowless hotel room. Obviously something was wrong there. Um, and, but for the recovering of the childhood memories, that was a very gradual thing that happened over years. I've been in therapy for almost 6 years now. So it wasn't like I uncovered this in like the first few weeks of working with a therapist. And I think it came down to a few things. I was building and developing this beautiful relationship with my inner child. And my partner calls it my Reiki basement, because the technique that I learned is like I visualize going down a staircase and then I knock on a door and little Byrne shows up, and she's different ages, but depending on the day and like what she wants me to know. But I have these conversations with little Byrne. And so I've been spending like a lot of time in my Reiki basement getting to know her. And so that relationship was healing, and my inner child was giving me such great information or intuitions about things I should do that would make me feel better. And like, she loves to write. Like, that's what I always was good at. And so like, she would give me these nudges. And I think that relationship piece was a piece of like what helped me start to recover, because all of a sudden, like, it was safe enough, I guess, to open that box and give it back to me. And then I would have like confusing nightmares, and I wasn't really sure at first, like what I was seeing and what, like, whether it was real. And then it all just sort of clicked. I think I was in a therapy session and I was just talking about my abuser in a different way, because they're also kind of a frustrating person. And then afterwards, I was baking cookies in my kitchen. And for some reason, I really wanted to listen to, I don't know if you ever listened to Korn. They were like really big when I was growing up, like when I was in high school. And so there's a song, and it's actually all about childhood sexual abuse. And I was like baking these cookies and I was really angry and I didn't know why. And I'm listening to this song falling away from me. And then all of a sudden, I just like slammed. I almost broke, it was a glass bowl. I almost broke it. I slammed it and I was like, oh my God, she abused me. And my whole body was like shaking and I was angry. And then later, when I had finally calmed down, I went into my Reiki basement and I like connected with my inner child, and I had this beautiful meditation. And actually, like my childhood dog showed up in the meditation. Like, that was really nice, and then I started crying because I like miss him so much. But like, they kind of helped validate and like showed me a little bit more of that. And so it was kind of like a half spiritual, half somatic memory. And there were also little pieces. I think this is important to name too. There were little pieces like kind of hints at it. And the biggest one was that previous, I don't know, time is a bit of a blur, but the last big family Christmas I attended, I was in line to serve myself like Christmas dinner to get turkey or whatever, and my abuser like squeezed my butt and made some kind of comment about like, you know, better fatten up or whatever. And
Yeah.
that has happened to me like my whole life. Like I never really realized like boundaries around my body, but for some reason in this moment, like my whole, like my blood like felt like it turned to ice, and I was really, really uncomfortable, and I felt really scared and anxious. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, this isn't the first time that they've pinched my butt, but I feel really uncomfortable. And then I was just like sitting at the Christmas dinner, like just spinning, and like everybody was talking, and I was like, I had a smile plastered on my face, but I was not present.
Yeah.
And I understand now that like that was a somatic memory, and it was kind of the beginning. Like I'd been so numb for so long that I just like allowed my body to be touched in weird ways, but all of a sudden I had healed enough that it was a somatic memory. So that was really the first. And then then the like kind of talking and gradually until I had that moment in the kitchen. But I think it's important to name that, because I always thought that like you either know that something happened or you don't, or you have one very vivid nightmare that explains exactly what it was, and it wasn't like that for me. It was very confusing, and it was like almost like putting puzzle pieces together and noticing that my body like did not feel safe around this person, and that's the last time that I saw her. After that I started taking steps to cut off contact.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with me. It sounds like it, yeah, I just this process of that gradual, the titration of bringing your experience to the surface. I'm really curious, why do you believe that is? Like I like on a philosophical level, on a spiritual level, do you think that there was like spirit guides or whatever language you want to use to kind of help you just like take that journey step by step in a way that you could handle? Do you think it was your inner child? Like, I'm curious what you think about that.
I think so. I want to name that I'm not trained in. I've read a few books because I'm very curious about trauma now that I like
Yeah.
understand that I live with that and that I like
Yeah.
have complex PTSD. And so I've been learning, but I'm by no means an expert. But there is like, if you were to talk to somebody who is an expert, they would tell you that like the brain actually kind of works in that way. The trauma brain, like it our brains are made to protect us, like everything else in
Yeah.
our body that's meant to keep us alive. And so it will actually just like store memories and like cut you off, like give you amnesia on purpose to protect you. But as you're like doing healing, and like I'm sure my therapist could speak to this from like a like more scientific space, like we're rewiring my brain and we're doing new patterns and like making more associations and building safety in my body. And so I was starting to develop more of a relationship to my body. I was starting to learn to be in my body for very short amounts of time. And I was starting to like, you know, heal that part of my brain, I guess, that like, again, I'm like, now I'm like, okay, Byrne, careful here. You're not a licensed therapist, but like, I think there is like the backing on like the scientific side of what that is and like
Yeah.
why memories kind of flood back the way they do. And it is related to safety. On the spiritual side, which is like the side that is more comfortable for me to work in, yes, I think that I have like a legion of guides around me that were like
Mm.
with holding my hand and wanting to help titrate that process of remembering. And so, but like little Byrne is like my like true north, I guess. And like she's
Yeah.
like she knew the whole time, but she didn't validate that for me until I was ready and like strong enough to hear it. So yeah, I guess on like my like spiritual side, little Byrne always knew. She always knew from day
Yeah.
one.
Wow, I've had chills so many times while you were talking, and I appreciate that you brought in that science and yeah, like naming you're not a therapist, but also you have a lot of knowledge, even just an
Yeah.
experience, you know? So naming that science, but then also bringing in that belief and that what your experience has also been with those legions of guides and your little Byrne, which just taking a moment, so much love for little Byrne. I feel her. I feel her spirit so strong.
To say quickly before we move on, like
Yeah.
the scientific piece of it can be really supportive for some people in like validating that their experience is real. And a book that I would recommend for anybody that might want to like learn about the science behind trauma and stored memories, The Body Keeps the Score is a really great book.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I read it and it was validating, but I had to read like 3 pages and close it. And then go do
Yeah.
something, another 3 pages. So it can also be triggering, but it's so validating. So if science is your jam and the like little Byrne guides that's a little too woo-woo, like please like consider reading something like that. Cause like it is backed by science.
Yeah. It is such a good book. I have started it. I have not finished it. And just like Byrne, like
Yeah.
what I have read has been like 3 pages at a time. It's like, okay. But yes, and I'm gonna set that down for a little while. Oh, so beautiful. I would love to know, Byrne. I can't believe how fast time has gone. Just listening to your story has been such a gift. And I would love to know maybe why, or even just a little bit about the what, is why you have chosen to now help others in this, or even just like how you're choosing to help others in this, or what you're doing. Like, I would love to just know about moving forward, where you see yourself going and how you want to help people.
Thanks. I love this question, Dakota. The short answer, Lil Byrne's very sassy. I can hear her all the time. And she's like, the short answer to that is because I told you to do it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but like let's give a better answer than just that. But like she's like, that's my idea. But I've always been a storyteller. I've always been a very expressive person. And I think also finding meaning in things that happen to you can be supportive sometimes.
Mm.
And like for me, a way to like make meaning out of what I experienced was I'm like, well, what do I do with this? Like, how do I move forward? And I'm like, I tell my story. I'm a writer. And I
Yeah.
think part of it too was like over time, it was a journey to be able to speak about this and even say the word survivor. Like for the longest time when I would say it, I'd actually stutter and I'd like sound like a snake, like hissing because it would take me so long to just say the S of survivor and like say that I like own that label and own that experience. But I started by, like I said, like reading other people's stories. And that's why I have a blog on my website, because sometimes it's overwhelming to say, I'm a survivor too, or to share that with anyone. So the first step I think is like being able to just like, maybe watch this video or like
Yeah.
podcasts or books or any like resources where you can engage with somebody who's been through something similar that can validate like that your experience is real. That was supportive. And then I slowly started sharing my story with like friends and then with like more like acquaintances. And it really got to me that every time I'd share it, like more times than not, somebody else also has a story.
Yeah.
And when you share your story, it gives someone else permission to share theirs. Not that we need permission, but it can be very validating to know, oh, I see this other person sharing. So now it maybe feels safer for me to share my story too. And I just feel like there is such a gap in talking about sexual trauma and especially incest. That's a topic that people don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. That's not like what you're going to bring to a dinner conversation. Like, hey, so incest, like that's
Yeah.
not what people want to talk about. But for those of us who've been through it, we need to talk about it, I think. And when I
Yeah.
was able to start sharing my story more widely, that's when I really started to heal. And I started to connect with people that like had different like modalities that were supportive, and the resources and the doors that open are so incredible when you start feeling safe enough to share your story. And so my vision is I want to keep writing. I want to write pieces of my story. I have so many little things that I want to share. For example, like what it's like going to medical appointments when you have sexual trauma and like how triggering that can be and like tips for how to navigate that. Like I just have all these things I want to share. And then I also would love to host healing circles for survivors to get together and just like be able to maybe do some breath work together, be able to connect and just like make connections with other people who've had similar experiences, that can be really validating. And now that we're in the practicum phase of our program right now, I'm doing a lot of breathwork sessions that are in the one-on-one format. And so I'm actually finding I didn't think that's where I was going to go with this, but I'm really enjoying like the opportunity to connect with people one-on-one and offer them more customized support. So I think that's where I want to go. I want to start a podcast at some point. This is like baby steps to that. So like when you like put this offer out, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good time to practice, like do it. But I just want to normalize conversations around sexual trauma. That's like my dream, is that this isn't like so taboo. And like I haven't found like a creator on Instagram yet that talks about incest. And I know that's a dark topic, but why does this have to be in the shadows? Like so many of us go through this, and it's underreported. It's don't get me on a rant about reporting. I don't want to go there right now, but like it's not, we don't know, I think, just how prevalent it actually is. But I can say from my conversations and sharing my stories, like I hear so many stories. And so I just want to normalize that it's okay to talk about this, and it's okay to heal from it. And you don't have to do that alone.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I really feel that in your story and in you sharing, like that is such a permissioning. My trauma is different as far as I know. And that is something I found in my own journey, is like the little tiny bits that I see of other people sharing about similar experiences. It empowers, right? Like, it's like, oh, I'm not just crazy, or I'm not just making a big deal out of nothing, like you talked earlier, like that denial. And so I can just feel and just know so many people are going to gain that courage from you, not even to like share their own stories if they're not ready for that yet, but to seek help just by knowing that there is a better place, right? That it can get better. And I think that is so beautiful and that is so powerful. And last thing here, I would love to hear, Byrne, is what would you say to someone if they are watching this and they're really just like feeling it, and maybe they don't really have a strong memory, but they're feeling a glimmer, they're just feeling that attraction and drawn to you because of the story you're sharing? What would you tell them?
Tell them I see you.
I
would tell them you are so much stronger and braver than you realize.
Yeah.
And that there are people out there who are going to love you and see you and support you. And if you didn't feel like that, maybe that glimmer is there and it's not a full-fledged memory because maybe it didn't feel safe to share, but that there are people out there who see you. And you're not alone.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say, which I think this is a question I get a lot, is like, how do I start to heal? Like, what is the first step? I'll give you the link to my website, because on my website, I have a page called resources. And there are some really great resources there for like how you can start to find help. And there's a website that was really helpful for me. It's called psychologytoday.com if you're looking to connect with a therapist. And I know I'm based in Canada, and like maybe, I don't know, like probably whoever's listening to this, you could be in the US, you could be in other places, but this website has a pretty big network, and you just put in your postal code and it will show you therapists in your area, and you can filter. So obviously for me, like sexual trauma, that was an important piece that I wanted to find someone who specialized in that. And then you can read their biographies, and you can learn a bit about them. And I obviously wanted someone, I'm such a spiritual person, so I liked that I found a therapist that like is a yoga teacher as well. So I'm like, okay, maybe she'll be open to talking about Reiki, and she was. So you can kind of, and if you want someone that's more clinical, you can look for that as well. But you can really read, and that was really supportive for me, because I had to kind of look at it for a few days before I got up the courage to reach out. And then most of them should offer, anyways, I think like it's pretty common practice, like a kind of like a discovery call. And so you can just like have a very quick chat with them to just feel out whether they feel like a good match. And of course, like therapy is not comfortable, but you should feel safe enough talking to your therapist, and like their job is to like support you in like feeling safer and like building trust. And so, but like that was a really great resource. I do recognize that therapy is it is pricey. It is a privilege, and that's why I want to put as much of my content out. Like a blog is free. Like I want to make things that I can offer that are supportive if you don't have the financial resources. But talking to a therapist is like my number one recommendation. And then I've got the link to like my Reiki, my mentor. She's amazing. Like there are just so many people out there that can complement. I really do feel like healing isn't just like a one person, one practitioner job. It kind of takes a village. And I've certainly got a village around me that's helped me get to where I'm at. And like, I would love to be part of other people's village, but I recognize that I'm not the only piece of that. And so therapy is a really great place to start for anybody that's curious. And that website is a great resource. And also if you live in a small place and you're like, there's never going to be anyone near me, like a lot of therapists do virtual sessions. So you can find somebody that like, if there's just no one in your area that vibes with you, you can probably find someone in your state, or if you're in Canada, in your province, that is more of a fit, and you can maybe look into doing a virtual session.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That is such a valuable resource. And I will be sure you can find the link to Byrne's website and social media handles and her blog specifically down in the show notes. Byrne, thank you so much for being on today. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you, Dakota, for having me. It was an honor to chat with you.